My name is Juan Francisco, and I'm a psychic medium and tarot card reader. I've always been curious about the supernatural, the paranormal, and psychic abilities, and I'm here to share my stories and interview folks who want to share their own stories with us. Let's get to it. Hey everybody, I hope this episode's finding you doing well. We are in the middle of the fall season, and there's a lot happening. Holidays, it's feeling busy, and I'm starting to feel it. And when this episode comes out, I will have already been in the state of Delaware with my family, visiting them for the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday. And then I'll be back in a month from now for the Christmas holiday. So it's going to be busy. A lot of things going on. So I hope that this fall season and the holiday season is treating you well and that you are doing the best that you can to enjoy it and relish in the community feeling of this season, or if you'd rather be to yourself and just the solitude that you need for this season. I wanted to use this episode, and I was not planning this episode because something unplanned came up in the last month, and that was the passing of my grandmother, who was 92. And I felt like it was a very interesting topic to bring up about what it's like being a psychic medium and encountering or experiencing a passing in the family. And I just want to say up front that I do not in any way want to capitalize or exploit my grandmother's passing. She passed, and she meant something to me, and she meant something to my family. And I'm going to share from my perspective how I'm feeling as I'm processing her passing. And I think I have that right to do that. And yes, I'm using a public platform to do it, but this public platform, all I talk about is people passing and people's loved ones coming through and communicating with them after they've passed. And I want to take the opportunity with my unique perspective, I like to think I have as a psychic medium who has experienced this loss, what it's like to go through that experience. So my grandmother passed, I think it was the week after Halloween, the first week of November. So it's been 2 or 3 weeks now. And she lived in Peru, in my dad's hometown of Ica in Peru, which is in the desert 4 hours south of the capital, Lima. I grew up with my grandmother visiting us quite often. She was around me very often. She would visit the U.S. every 5 or 6 months. She lived with us for a month or two when she was here in the U.S. with us. I would join her at her doctor's appointments. Both her and my grandfather, they would come by and visit us. And she was just so much fun. She was such a lady, but get her behind a closed door with some intimate family members, like just family members that she really cared about. And she would crack these jokes, sometimes perverted jokes with my dad. And she would be silly. It was really funny. I remember, this is R.I.P. grandma, but I would tell her, like, take out your teeth. And she would, take her dentures out, hands-free, just take them out. If you're watching my video version of this episode, you see what I'm doing. So she was so fun. She was such a good person. And I think I had some very close grandparents on my mom's side, but it was different with this grandma. Not better or worse, or not making a judgment call on better grandparents, not good grandparents. It was about just how close I felt to each one of them. And this grandma, I felt particularly close to because she would live with us day to day for a month or two when she would visit us from Peru. My dad and her, they were like best friends. Hey, Sella. That's Sella shaking her fur. My dad and my grandma, they were like best friends. And she really, really loved us. And she really loved my mother. She loved my mother. My mom, I have permission from my mom to share an experience that my mother had. But before I go into that, my mom has said like she was the best kind of mother-in-law you could have. She was so easy to be with and to talk to, and she never intruded into the marriage or into the family, like our own family stuff as a family unit. She never intruded into anything or imposed her opinion or judgment. And she just left my mom. It's funny. My mom says sometimes your grandparents, your dad's on my dad's side, your grandparents would take my side over their son's side, which is kind of funny. So my grandma passed 3 weeks ago. She unfortunately had a not easy passing. And I think the week that she was in the hospital, I was finding that I wasn't getting emotional. I was like, why am I not crying? She is in her final moments. Why am I not crying? And I felt really bad that I wasn't crying. And then I had a phone call with my dad, and he told me just how much she was suffering and how hard it was to see that. And that made me break down and cry. Because that is the worst thing I could imagine her going through. And then the day she passed, I think 2 nights later, she passed. And I just felt like stunned. I was expecting it, as we all were, but I just felt stunned. And I honestly, since then, I really haven't had a breakdown. And that was 3 weeks ago, 2 to 3 weeks ago. And I feel weird that I haven't cried. But what I do know, this one thing that is giving me assurance that I'm not gives me assurance that I'm still an empathetic person, is that even though I'm not crying, I'm not getting emotional, I do think about her, and it feels surreal to know she's not here. Like, I almost can't believe it. It almost doesn't make sense to me that she's not here anymore, physically not here anymore. So I'm processing that, and I feel weird sharing that publicly with you listeners, because I feel like I might get judged because of how I've reacted to my grandmother's passing. But I think what's important to know is that everyone grieves or processes everyone grieves or processes things differently. And just because I'm not reacting or responding a certain way on the outside doesn't mean I'm not processing it on the inside at all, you know? So that's my process right now. And I'll admit that I'm a psychic medium. And sometimes the topic of death still scares me because I don't know what's going on the other side, really. Like, what is it like to be dead? What is it like to die, to go through the process of dying? What's going on through your mind? My mind, what will go on through my mind? And that's scary to me. And that may sound ironic, and I've said that before on the podcast. I've talked about my fear of death. But that's who I am. Yes, I'm afraid of death, and I talk to the deceased. Yes, I am having a hard time processing my grandmother's passing from an emotional perspective and mental too. And yes, I talk to the deceased. I guess I feel weird about all those things happening at once within me, but I can't do anything other than accept it and let it run its course. And so I want to before I go into some really spectacular stories, I want to first tell you, listener, that you grieve or process the way you need to. And don't let anyone's judgments get to you. You have to process it the way you need to. The most important thing to me is I want to be there for my father and my family during this time. That's important to me because I know my grandma's okay. She's good. She's on the other side and she's good. I know she is. I feel it. So I want to be there for the humans amongst me that I care about very much, and support them when I can and how I can. So story time related to my grandmother. So I got permission from my mother to talk about this on the podcast. I got a call the night that my grandmother passed. It was 12:45 a.m., late night. And I got the call from my aunt that she had passed. And I was stunned, and I was like, wow, okay. And it woke me up, the call, and hung up the phone. I tried calling my brother, couldn't reach him. Then I called my mother, and she picked up, and she had heard the news. And we would just start talking about her, and I started looking at flights to go down to Peru, which didn't end up happening. That's a whole other story. But was looking at flights, and we just kept reminiscing about my grandmother and the funny things she would do, the funny things she would say, her personality. And my mom was telling me at that point, what I shared earlier in this episode, that my mom thought she was an amazing mother-in-law. She was so lucky to have her for a mother-in-law. And then my mom said, a little while ago, because she told me, Juan, I've been going in and out of sleep tonight. And then I got this call. But before I got the call, like a little while before I got the call, I had woken up because the sliding glass doors that lead to the yard, the blinds that go from the top of the sliding glass doors to the floor, the blinds were rustling like something had moved against them. And they made a noise, like flapping noises. And she thought, let me see which one of the dogs is out there. When she remembered, there are no dogs in the house because the dogs are with my brother. My own brother. Because sometimes my brother will have the dogs at my parents' house for them to just daycare them, care for them for the day, to dog sit. And she's like, the dogs are not here. They're with my other son. And so she went out there to the living room where the sliding glass doors are, and she saw nothing there. But she heard the blinds rustling from her room. My parents' main bedroom is, you step out of the main bedroom and you see the sliding glass doors right there. So she heard them clearly, but there was nothing there. She thought, she told me maybe that was Domitila, which is what we call my grandmother. Maybe that was Domitila saying hello, or spirit just saying hello. Thought, that's so interesting. So then we learned a day later that my grandmother passed around the time that my mother heard the blinds rustling. So we know my grandma came to say hello / goodbye to my mom. My dad was in Peru with my grandmother when she passed. So my mom was in the house by herself. My mom got to experience that in the house. And I just think that's so flipping awesome. So awesome. That was my grandmother saying hello. And I think it was my grandmother saying thank you. And I'll see you soon. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. So my grandmother passes on, I think it was a Wednesday or a Thursday. It was Wednesday, I believe. And I talked to my dad about flying down to Peru for the viewing, the casket viewing, and the funeral service. And my dad told me, Juan, honestly, it's not really worth you spending the money or spending the time to come down to Peru, because this is all going to be done in like 48 hours, in 2 days. We're going to be cremating her within 2 days. And she said, honestly, Juan, it's okay. And I said, are you sure? Because I really want to be there for you. And I wanted to be there for the ceremony. But I also knew that it was going to take a while to get down to Peru from where I am in New York City. So I didn't go to Peru, and I planned instead the next week to go to Delaware when my dad was to arrive in Delaware, and to be with him and the rest of my mother, my brother, just to be in solidarity and to support them in person with them for a week after my grandmother's passing. But before that, it's Sunday. This is 3 or 4 days after my grandmother passed, and I am running in my neighborhood, as I do. I like to run on the weekends in my neighborhood, and I noticed this woman. It's an Asian woman who is pushing back her hair with both of her hands in a similar way that my grandmother would have done. It just looks so similar, and it made me do a double take. Now, before we go any further, I know that may sound a little stereotypical and racist because I say it's an Asian woman. My grandma was a full-blooded Chinese woman. I am part Chinese. So when I say that, I don't mean to say like they look the same because of their race. This older woman, it was her body language. The fact that she was Asian was an additional thing that reminded me of my grandma. But it was not only her race and her appearance, it was her body language and the way she used her hands to brush her hair back out of her eyes. And it made me do a double take. Because what I saw at first, when I saw this woman, was 2 hands in front of the eyes, pushing hair back. I didn't see the eyes yet. I had seen that, and I kept running. But then I looked back again, and now I saw her eyes. And even her eyes reminded me of my grandma's eyes. It was incredible. Like the first glance, I thought, wait, is that my grandma? Or did that look like my grandma? And I really think that my grandmother was saying hello through that woman. I believe that spirit can use humans who are alive and breathing to remind us of them. They kind of like say, hey, look at this person. It's going to make you think of me. Sometimes spirit will enter a person's body. So I believe that can happen too, so that they can take on the person somehow takes on the body language and appearance somehow of the spirit. Not a possession, makes it sound like that, but just like almost like two spirits becoming one for a split second, so you can notice it. And it was just really wonderful. I thought, oh, hi, Grandma. Thank you, Grandma. That's the first thing I thought. I was like, thank you, Grandma. Hi, Grandma. I think that was her saying hello to me. And there are many stories like that when people think they see their loved one in a grocery store, or they see someone who looks like their loved one and they can't stop looking at them like, wait, that's so weird. And what I've learned and what I've heard, what I've learned from other mediums is that is our loved one saying hello to us. And I believe this was my grandma saying hello to me. So those two things happened after my grandmother's passing, and they're not things that we looked out for, that we sought after, that we even really asked for. Although I did ask my grandma I did ask her to give me signs, but more importantly, to give my dad comfort, give my dad signs, because she had given my mom a sign. But really, I wasn't desperately looking for a sign. I was just running in my neighborhood and I saw this woman that reminded me of her and made me do a double take. My mom, she heard blinds rustling in the living room and she didn't expect that to happen. How freaking cool, right? And what's interesting is I feel really, really blessed and lucky, because when my grandfather passed on my mom's side, he gave me a sign. In like 2 or 3 days after he passed, he rang my doorbell twice. And I have another episode towards the beginning of one of my earliest episodes, I think, of this podcast is me talking about my grandfather ringing my doorbell late at night. It's a fun episode. It was a fun one to record. And now I have this grandmother who has passed, and she gave us signs. She gave me a personal sign. And I really feel her around me. I do. As I talk to you right now, I can feel her energy with me right now. And I can't wait to feel more of that energy. And I can't wait to see what other signs she brings into my life and the life of those whom I love and care about. Because I think she was just such a beautiful soul, and she really deserves all the beautiful energy on the other side. And I hope she can use some of that to give us signs. Not to be selfish, but I welcome them. And that's the thing. When someone passes, it's not easy when someone passes. It's so difficult. And who am I to tell somebody, just be patient, you'll see the signs? I can't say that to somebody. All I can say is the signs will come when they need to, and that there's nothing else I can say to help you feel better. I'm so sorry. And so I want to say that to you, the listener, because maybe you've been waiting for a sign for 2 years from your loved one. Maybe you've been waiting for 1 week, and that feels like a lot. 1 week, 1 year, whatever time is, you feel like you've been waiting, it just feels like a lot to you. And I want to validate that feeling, because I have had some loved ones pass. Well, I've gotten signs from some loved ones, but I've always told myself, I want a signier sign. I want a bigger sign. And maybe I need to remember that a sign is a sign, and I need to be grateful for that. But if I would have not gotten any signs, I know it wouldn't have meant that they weren't ever around me. So I want to tell you, if you're struggling, that number one, I'm so sorry that you feel that there are no signs coming to you. Have faith and know that your loved ones are so with you right now. And I don't know how spirit works in terms of when they want to give signs. I don't know what schedule they're on. From what I understand, time doesn't exist on the other side. They just know when to do what in our lives for us. I don't know why they send signs when they need to or when they do it. What I do know is that we get signs when we need them, not always when we want them. And when we're in the midst of our grief, sometimes our grief can distract us from seeing the signs. I feel like that sounds so heartless of me to say that. But it's the same reason I tell people, if you've recently had someone pass in your life within the last 3 months, it's not a good idea to get a mediumship reading. Not just with me, with any medium. Because I know I've got it in the past of psychic reading because I was desperate to hear something or to know something. And it ended up being not healthy for me to do that. And it's so easy for a psychic or a medium to take advantage of somebody's grief. And so I, as a medium, do not feel comfortable telling someone, oh, your grandma just passed 3 weeks ago. Have a reading with me so you can hear from her. That doesn't sit well with me. It sounds very advantageous, sounds exploitative. And it's important for someone to sit with their grief and to process it as they need to. And to know that they can connect with their grandmother. They can connect with their loved one. And the reason to go to a mediumship reading, if you want to go to a mediumship reading because you haven't heard anything from your loved ones, that is fine, but give it time after the person is passed. Because you may not be hearing, because you are so enveloped by your grief, you may not be receiving the information as it won't sound as coherent to you because you have this layer of grief. And I want to validate that layer of grief. You're supposed to feel that. It's okay to feel that. It's natural. But sometimes when we're in the midst of our emotions, it's hard to hear what's being shared with us. It's hard to absorb it. I'm babbling on. But this is all coming to mind right now for me as I talk about my grandmother's passing. She is the last grandparent to pass in my life. I have no grandparents left in the physical world. And that sounds difficult. That feels difficult to say out loud. But that is the course of life, right? And I'm really wanting to get closer, not only to my guides on the other side, but to my loved ones on the other side through prayer. Because I don't do all that enough. And I know that I have a team of people on the other side, a team of souls on the other side who want to help me, who want to help the loved ones in my life. And I can now go to them as a resource for inspiration, for love, for support, spiritual support. I can go to them. And I don't take advantage of that as much as I should. I don't use that resource as much as I should, or connect. I don't want to say use. That sounds like, and saying taking advantage of, those are not the best phrases to use. I don't tap into that spiritual support as much as I could, is what I mean to say. So what I want this episode to land at, to put a bow on it, is psychic mediums grieve too. Psychic mediums have to process passings and deaths in their family too. Psychic mediums are humans. And I think it's easy to think a psychic medium is like totally okay with someone dying. Like, it's no big deal. You're going to see them again, aren't you? You can talk to them, can't you? Well, yeah, I'm going to see my grandmother. I'm going to see other loved ones again one day. Yeah, I can talk to them and communicate with them in the way that I can. But it's not the same as having them physically here. It's not the same. Sometimes it can make us feel a hug, a spiritual hug. That can happen, but for the most part, I won't be able to physically hug my grandmother again. And like I said, I am dealing with her passing okay. I'm doing okay because I've accepted that she was old and she was suffering. That's the thing. She was suffering. And that's not what I wanted for my grandma at all. And I know she's not suffering anymore. That being said, it still feels surreal that I don't have that grandmother in my life, physical life anymore. And that's my human side. And there's nothing wrong with that human side. It's part of life. It's okay to grieve. I think if there is a psychic medium out there who has no emotional response of grief towards someone passing, someone near and dear to them passing in their life, I don't understand that. But hey, if that works for you and you're healthy, you feel you're healthy and you feel good about it, that's how you respond to things like that, power to you, that's just fine. But it doesn't mean everyone else has to feel the same way. So I had no agenda for this episode. As you could probably tell, I've been babbling on and on. But I hope that this episode about my grandmother and the experiences both my mother and I had after her passing, inspires you in knowing that what you are going through, whether it's the passing of a loved one or anything else that's making you sad, making you feel sad this week, that you are valid in feeling however way you feel, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anybody else. You're valid. Your feelings are valid. And just because you may express those feelings differently than other people do, doesn't mean that you need to listen to people's judgments about how you're processing your feelings, processing the thing or the situation that you're thinking of, that you're experiencing or encountering. You are valid. And you are connected. There's something so much bigger than what's in front of our eyes physically. So much bigger. And I think my grandmother's passing has reminded me of that. There are things that are so much bigger. And there's hope that comes from knowing that. I think that's the bow I'm going to put on this episode. So, because of this episode that was impromptu, I'm actually not sure which episode is coming next week. So I'm just going to work on it. But I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening. And by the way, I'm going to predict, because I'm psychic. I'm going to estimate that we're going to hit 10,000 downloads of this podcast by December 31st, 2023. And I am very excited about that, which is amazing. So I just want to thank you so much for listening and for watching, whether you're listening through a podcast platform or you're watching on YouTube. I am just over the moon happy that my podcast has gotten so many downloads in just over 2 years. And I do start to think, well, other podcasts have more downloads than mine. But you know what? For some dude like me who's in his studio with, on video, if you're watching a video, with my bed in my background, I don't have a proper studio. I don't have like a nice backdrop to put behind me. I'm just a guy living in New York City who started practicing as a psychic medium 2 years ago, started this podcast just over 2 years ago, because I wanted to talk about this stuff and explore it with other people. There's a fuzzy on my microphone. Pardon me. Back to what I was saying. Just what I was just doing. I'm a simple guy. I have no perfect equipment. I love my microphone. My microphone, I think, is great, and I think I sound great. If you think I sound great, let me know too. This guy, in his studio apartment in New York, recording this on his computer, no sound booth, no sound system or whatever of any kind, 10,000 downloads in 2 years. I know we're going to get to 10,000. That's amazing. And that's all because of you. So thank you so much for supporting me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for wanting to converse about these things. And if you have any feedback or any questions regarding what I brought up in this episode, email me, DM me. I'll read it on the next podcast episode or the podcast episode after that. I want to hear from you. So thank you for listening. Have a beautiful rest of your day. If you have a question or topic you want me to cover on Third Eyesight, head to my website, juanfranciscospirit.com/contact, and send a message my way. If you really enjoyed this episode, leave a review wherever you listen. I'd really appreciate it.